doing this is more in an effort to push general like political discourse further left in America. I feel like if I can get larger online and grow more of a presence, get into those AOC Among Us games, have maybe get big enough that I can canvass for political candidates that have like a serious chance of winning, and having political pulling the political discussion in America further left, so that it is safer for me to go, I guess you could say, a bit more mask off.
This is what I say about the Nazgul vortex, okay? This is what's going to happen in the future, all right? I'm going to tell you flat out what's going to happen in the future. You're going to need to resist it, okay? There will be people telling you, we could have a workers' nation, but you need to drop the BLM shit. You need to drop the trans stuff. You have to drop the Democrats.
It's really a matter of repeating everything the Democrats say, but then adding a punctuation mark that says that actually I'm a democratic socialist, so I'm absolved of having to take any responsibility of the people that I'm shilling for and defending and completely advocating for. So it's a win-win situation.
My goal is to make it so that sock Dems are considered right-wing within the Democratic Party and the pragmatic side of political discussion.
Yeah, I've been practicing up to debate the bourgeois out of control over the means of production in the free marketplace of ideas. I mean, that's the ideal, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, Breadtube is sort of the Holy Roman Empire of online politics, because politically it has nothing to do with the conquest of bread, aside from an abstract utopia. Say what you want about Kropotkin, but at least he was concerned with a real social transformation, and not the realization of grand ideals through state institutions as if by magic. Also, as of late, Breadtube seems to have its presence more on Twitch and not YouTube. If Breadtube could be represented by a single person, I would say it would be the offspring of ContraPoints and Destiny, which then got an education through Zero Books videos. I say ContraPoints and Destiny because stylistically you have two options. Using the emptiest talking points, which are substantiated by the most lazy interpretations of philosophy, for a project of artistic and creative expression, for self-exploration and funding your excessive self-indulgence. Or a new type of esport, which measures the participants' ability to shout meaningless rhetoric with references to a botched understanding of theory, and then pivot out of the conversation with, I only want to talk about real stuff like policy, when the participants' ability to conjure arguments from abstract concepts has expired. Here, the tragedy with Breadtube isn't because they can capture a large audience, but because they've mastered it and degenerated online politics in the process. While Breadtube is just a bunch of people on the internet, their presence is not at all insignificant. Breadtubers are among some of the top earners on Patreon, the second top earner being Chapo Trap House, which makes a patent lawyer's salary every month to make a comedy about the most milquetoast of socialist politics, so, that's nice. But the significance is not in the abundance of Breadtube's earnings, but what their popularity signals. 1. The significance of Breadtube. If we want to know what the significance of Breadtube is, you first have to understand who this content is made for, which are college and university students, and not a specific type of student, but the abstract student, the naive, impermanent type, probably in the social sciences, who after will go through the academic NGO activist pipeline and will fill the ranks of the younger generation of members in the Democratic Party, or Liberal and NDP if you're in Canada, and other affiliated organizations. Left-wing politics that deal with socialism, anarchism, and communism are really just an avenue for self-expression and exploration. Something that they will eventually grow out of, however, will retain some part of the radical and moral attitudes of that particular brand of leftism, with that very timid reduction of politics to emotional empathy, as is typical of online, Western, middle-class leftists. In essence, Breadtube is the new social trend that will inspire a generation of charlatans. But this problem isn't unique to Breadtube. It's simply a feature of the strategy of mass appeal. By playing into mass appeal, all you will accomplish is gathering a large and ignorant mass that, on average, is more interested in short-term indulgence rather than strenuous study. Telling them to go out and engage in politics is only going to activate their primary impulse, which is to go to the state institutions, which the state has conditioned as the primary means of social change. Instead of these narrowly minded games of mass appeal, the goal should be to foster a community that will attract the right people, people with abilities that are useful, and to show them the avenues where they can educate themselves. The primary long-term goal of an online leftist community should be to create a convenient social network with a modest qualitative barrier to entry, so that dedicated people can make connections and create organizations to kick off the emergence of a new movement. It is only after this necessary development, when gathering and organizing the masses becomes the important task at hand. Otherwise, by playing into the politics of mass adherence and leading the charge into ordinary politics, you only embolden the opportunists and the self-interested by creating a situation of short-term mass sensation, which always eventually dies out. This is the business of creating social trends, and not social development.
This is what I do. At the end of the day, political power is built by numbers. That's it. Support and public popularity are the bedrock of all populist movements, and we are a populist movement. Unless you want to do some weird, like, secretly become head of the CIA and launch a military coup for leftism kind of thing, which historically tends not to be how leftism is implemented in the real world. Our goals are to push people towards values that will make them more receptive to our political goals. So,
2. The politics of Breadtube. The beautiful thing about this video is that the likes of Vosh and Xanderhal could be on some Bernie or Buzz shit and I would still be saying the same things. So yes, sorry, your favorite sock dem e-girls are on trial too. See, the thing about the left is that just even 3 years ago, the debate wasn't over which Democratic candidate to support, but over whether to support Bernie Sanders or whatever small socialist party like the PSL or some shit. And both of these clowns were blown the fuck out by pessimistic impossibilists, third worldists, Maoists, and anarchists. For those who were truly aware of the doomed situation of socialism in the First World, depending on political affiliation, the consensus was anywhere from dual power, anti-imperialist resistance, direct action, or people's war if you're a meme, and accelerationism if you smoke meth. The problem with most anti-Breadtube content is that it's framed in the same politics as Breadtube. The debate is not concerned with a correct understanding of politics or the correct application of political action, but rather which politicians should be elected to the body of state personnel. Breadtube's politics, really, at the end of the day, is liberal altruism motivated by a politics of emotional empathy, but with a fascination for the aesthetics and slogans of the labor movement to give them a radical edge. This is why they are so fascinated with socialist intersectionality, because they dismiss the material dynamics of class struggle in the modern age for a sensory understanding. Their revolution is the empowerment of all the marginalized groups in capitalist society. They identify all of the characters of privilege and power in mainstream capitalist society and juxtapose that with an unconditional support for the identities that are their negations. Their revolutionary subject is whatever the newest and most grotesque manifestation of these marginalized identities of the day is. Obese black trans prostitutes one day, and schizophrenic non-binary Adderall dealers the next. Fill the political institutions with heckin' valid trans shonkerinos aligned with left-branded altruism, and your grand ideals will manifest themselves. This is what leads us to the core issue, which is what Breadtube thinks is material analysis is really just a sensory analysis, reasoning with the symbols provided to them by their liberal education and pop culture. What Breadtube thinks is material analysis is really just a standard observation of the wealth of certain groups of people, an observation that can be as easily made by idealists, liberals, New Age spiritualists, and Catholic monarchists alike. There is nothing inherently Marxist about wanting to reduce wealth inequality. In fact, in terms of dictating the reduction of wealth inequality, true Marxism is pessimistic here, that it does more harm than good, degrading capitalism into feudalism and empowering state contractors and rent seekers. It logically follows that when profits from production are heavily taxed, then passive income provided from various forms of rent becomes more appealing. The best example of Breadtube's sensory understanding is their analysis of fascism through the principles established by Umberto Eco, which is explicitly in the school of semiotics, of understanding social phenomena through signs and allegories. All it takes for them to state that Trump was a fascist is to point out his authoritarianism, demagoguery, and nationalism, but this is very detached from material analysis. A competent Marxist, when trying to determine whether a state system is fascist or not, would look at how the state and the classes are being organized and whether the state is making moves to subordinate production for nationalist and imperialist expansion. In my opinion, with Trump this is clearly not the case, and his administration can really just be understood as standard bourgeois authoritarianism.
Definitions premise reality, guys. The only reason... Listen, guys. You guys want to know the origin of fascism? Mussolini opened the Oxford Dictionary and he found the definition of fascism, which was Umberto Eco's 14 points. And he basically said, I will be that. And that's the origin of fascism. Basically, like, Hitler did the same thing. He opened the Oxford Dictionary and he found the definition of fascism. But there's also competing theories that the definition of fascism, which is written by God in a stone tablet millions of years ago, esoterically and metaphysically manifested itself in reality, as a reflection of this eternal Platonic idea. And the definition of fascism became real because it woke up on the wrong side of the bed one day and it said, I will be. I will be. I will be.
The other issue with Breadtube's politics is the way in which they conceive of revolutionary determinism, which is a source of their misconception that their politics provides anything revolutionary. For them, revolution is a natural occurrence, which occurs when the oppressed have become fully empowered through reformist movements and their social welfare has been maximized by state reforms, causing them to go into revolt to get more shit when mass consciousness realizes they aren't content with the concessions given to them. Marx's determinism, contrary to vulgar interpretation, doesn't see revolution as an inevitable occurrence of nature, some sort of natural law, but rather as action contained within the laws that direct capitalist development, where the project of social revolution is to act with these laws in consideration and taking into account the present stage of capitalism.
I'm not so idealist as to believe there would ever be a point in time, or at least a likely point in time, where everything that we want done could ever be achieved without some kind of meaningful material conflict. My goal, or at least my hope, would be that we could achieve enough of a gain through reform that we could prompt the powers that be into action against us, in which case any revolutionary action would be retaliatory rather than instigatory, which would give us well, at least optically, a pretty strong upper hand.
In this clip, Vosh, in explaining his genius 200 IQ strategy to instigate a revolution, sort of gives a perverted version of Sorel's dialectic between proletarian syndicates and the bourgeois state, which, for example, explains that if workers organize a strike and then take actions against the bourgeoisie, that it will provoke a response where the bourgeoisie and the state become emboldened in their values and will respond with force, which provokes with more intensity another response from the workers, and this dialectic repeats until an ultimate revolution or an ultimate defeat. However, in Vosh's case, his dialectic perverts this by combining it with Sorel's other dialectic between the workers and the bourgeois state, which explains that if the bourgeois philanthropists, along with state politicians, consult with socialists and enact reforms, that this will pacify the workers away from revolution and consolidate the rule of the bourgeoisie. In Vosh's final synthesis, we have a dynamic where the workers get behind reformist candidates who go into the state and get a lot of free shit, which will then later down the road make the bourgeoisie and the state really, really, really angry, making them like shoot a bunch of workers or something like really fascist or something. I don't know, like something really fascist, like banning Vosh's favorite OnlyFans pages, something really bad like that. And so when that happens, the revolution will finally happen, and it won't be bad because they shot first. This is Vosh's dialectic. He's truly the greatest theoretician in 500 years. I'm serious. It's true. 3. Opportunism and the fallacy of entryist politics. Among the well-connected breadtubers, the dominant political trend that they push to their followers is that of partisan entryism into left-leaning but ultimately extremely moderate established parties. While they may even profess a hatred for these established parties, they nonetheless proclaim that if an army of radical activists swarm these parties, that they can fundamentally change the nature and function of them. However, a political party has a much more important existence outside of its personnel, as they cannot function without its established interest groups and courted classes, which it relies on for financial support and in turn compensates them with their representation in the political institutions. Even if the American radical activists took over the Democratic Party, this would be a very temporary seizure, although most certainly energetic. The party establishment would feel slightly threatened, but would treat it as a spectacle of youthful energy and ultimately use that angle to consolidate them and formally incorporate them into the party establishment, primarily using them for social media campaigns to secure more social capital. It would also be likely that 50 years down the road, that a movie would be made about the tame insurrection. This is exactly what happened with Bernie Sanders, AOC, and their followers, and will eventually happen with the current upsurge in the American left. The reality is that those in power do not mind having among them dissident actors who make abstract, radical proclamations towards ideas such as social democracy, socialism, and even communism, so long as they prove to be useful bureaucratic functionaries. George Sorel makes the astute observation and illusions of progress of how the French nobility would welcome dissident intellectuals who would, in an abstract and utopian sense, proclaim ideas as radical for the time as communism into the bureaucracy as to entice them into timidity and weaken those factions. This sly and discreet deployment of state force has a long history and has proved throughout history to be the most efficient means of suppressing socialism. The most naive aspect of this entryist line is how it believes it can transform society towards socialism by hijacking the bourgeois machinery, as though the aspirations and professions of the state personnel are self-fulfilling by sheer means of occupying positions within the state institutions as bureaucratic functionaries. The machinery of the bourgeois state refers to the primary appendages of state force, being the police and military, the body of the state being the parliamentary, judicial, and legislative institutions, and in the modern context we can add the institutions of social peace, being social programs and social infrastructure. This state machinery is constructed with the purpose of securing the existence of the bourgeois state, which contains the ultimate purpose of maintaining capitalism. Far from being an abstract platitude, the ultimate purpose of the bourgeois state has a real meaning. Logically, the bourgeois state itself ceases to exist once it fails to maintain capitalism, since if capitalism collapsed, the bourgeoisie would no longer be in the position of the ruling class, and therefore the institutions that comprise the bourgeois state would be of no use for the new society, since they are designed for the ends of the ruling bourgeoisie. Because of this, evolutionary socialist movements such as democratic socialism and its ephemeral ally, contemporary social democracy, can never make steps towards socialism using social reform. What social reform really accomplishes is restraining but ultimately stabilizing capitalism and consolidating the proletariat and revolutionary classes towards timid relaxation. This is a stagnating movement and is ultimately conservative as it preserves present modes of life, and even reactionary when it resurrects past modes of life it sees as promoting social justice. An example of this sort of reaction could be the reduction of workers' unions into guilds of the modern era. At this time, it must be emphasized that the bourgeois state has no independent existence outside of the inescapable iron laws of capitalist development. For these reasons, it is necessary to call this political trend what it truly is: optimism.
The optimist in politics is an inconstant and even dangerous man, because he takes no account of the great difficulties presented by his projects. These projects seem to him to possess a force of their own, which tends to bring about their realization all the more easily, as, in his opinion, they are destined to produce more happiness. He frequently thinks that small reforms of the political system and, above all, of government personnel will be sufficient to the direct movement of society in such a way to mitigate those evils of the modern world which seem so hideous to sensitive souls. As soon as his friends come to power, he declares that it is necessary to let things alone for a while, not to be too hasty, and to learn to be content with whatever their good intentions suggest. It is not always self-interest that dictates the expressions of satisfaction. As people have often believed, self-interest is strongly aided by vanity and the illusions of poor quality philosophy. The optimist moves with a remarkable ease from revolutionary anger to the most ridiculous social pacifism.
There has been the consistent trend of reformist movements where they rely on waves of temporary enthusiasm and ephemeral allies to launch themselves into positions of power, but once that all fades away, they are ultimately pacified by the ruling class with luxuries and positions of power under their agenda. This happened with Bernie Sanders. Right when he endorsed Hillary Clinton, he essentially became the DNC's pet to attract more urban and youth voters. His campaign with Biden also seemed like a spectacle, as though he wasn't even trying. This also happened with a prominent Black Lives Matter activist, Patrisse Cullors, where when the That summer hype died out, she was left to be courted by the establishment and was made into a millionaire. 4. State politics and social peace. For the anarcho-Bidenists, as they call themselves, in their effort to defeat Trump electorally, harm reduction became the ultimate principle instead of the pursuit of workers' power. A past principle which was evident in their shallow explanations of libertarian socialist thought. The principle of harm reduction has its origins from community workers on the front lines of the war on drugs. Those who administer services such as clean needles, safe injection sites, methadone clinics, etc. In this context, harm reduction is a good principle, however it belongs nowhere near politics, as it is an anti-political sentiment because it ultimately rejects the question of power and will turn any movement that embraces this principle towards impotency. It ultimately does not matter how radical the circles where these strategies of social welfare originate if they are ultimately taken up by bureaucratic functionaries of a bourgeois imperialist state. Wherever a socialist movement is successful in getting a state to adopt social welfare measures, this should only be seen as the movement surrendering an opportunity for themselves to secure power so that the state can secure its maintenance over social peace. The opportunity here that is lost is for the movement itself to administer the social welfare project outside of the state and win the support of the masses. Opposition to state encroachment into social life has a long history on the radical left, and for Breadtube, this tradition is only maintained for things that they do not like.
One of the outstanding tasks of the proletariat is, obviously, to combat with every possible means the extension of the state and to free social life from the intervention of state functionaries. Statism is the ideal of the petty bourgeoisie. It is the exact opposite of socialism.
Because of misconceptions, George Sorel is probably unpalatable to many. He was a pluralist and a libertarian socialist, but what do I know since the great scholars of Kaiserreich have placed him as the foremost thinker of national syndicalism. Instead, maybe Oscar Wilde's Soul of Man Under Socialism would be a better recommendation for its scathing rejection of altruism. But if we are to reject altruistic harm reduction, then does this mean that we adopt an accelerationism framed in terms of making things worse until a revolt inevitably occurs? In my opinion, not at all, because that sort of accelerationism is political optimism all the same, just a different manifestation of it. Just like the altruism of harm reduction, entryism, and possibilism, it treats revolution and socialist transformation as a natural occurrence. Revolution does not depend on the instinct of the working masses, but on these. There are already present developments where these opportunities reveal themselves. The first thing that comes to mind are biohacker labs that can cheaply manufacture pharmaceutical drugs like insulin in the face of pharmaceutical companies that charge highly inflated prices through their monopoly. It is here where we can think far and above the dual power as conceived by Breadtube, which are these like gay little cafe and grocery co-ops that serve no purpose beyond some proclamation of the abstract ideals of economic democracy by inner city art hoes and new males. Woke gentrification, essentially. It is worth discussing, I think, the least talked about theoretical justification for reformism, which is what is certain is that I myself am not a Marxist incident with Paul Lafarge and Jules Gueside over the reformism of the program of the French Workers' Party. Now, what isn't talked about is that the intention of that program was to create a workers' dual power by carving out state functions. So unless you think you can split apart the state, abolish the military, and give everyone guns, then I don't think any reformist policies are worth pursuing. Here are a few excerpts from the program to explain what I mean.
Abolition of all laws over the press, meetings, and associations, and above all, the law against the International Working Men's Association. Removal of the livre, that administrative control over the working class, and of all the articles of the code establishing the inferiority of the worker in relation to the boss, and of woman in relation to man. Removal of the budget of the religious orders, and the return to the nation of the goods said to be mortmain, movable and immovable, including all the industrial and commercial annexes of these corporations. Abolition of standing armies and the general arming of the people. The commune to be master of its administration and its police. Protective supervision of apprentices by the workers' organizations. Legal minimum wage determined each year according to the local price of food by a workers' statistical commission. Scientific and professional instruction of all children, with their maintenance the responsibility of society, represented by the state and the commune. Prohibition of all interference by employers in the administration of workers-friendly societies, provident societies, etc., which are returned to the exclusive control of the workers. Intervention of the workers in the special regulations of the various workshops, an end to the right usurped by the bosses to impose any penalty on their workers in the form of fines or withholding of wages. Annulment of all the contracts that have alienated public property, banks, railways, mines, etc., and the exploitation of all state-owned workshops to be entrusted to the workers who work there.
Lastly, a revolutionary line of dual power in the First World also cannot be divorced from a consistent anti-imperialist position, since the greatest barrier to international revolution at the current time is the labor divide between the First World nations and Third World nations. The divide being between capital-intensive industry and labor-intensive industry, which is upheld by imperialist powers as it is a convenient setup for global trade. The point of a materialist conception of anti-imperialism, such as this, is not to oppose imperialism against certain regimes because they are in some way hostile to the United States, or, just because they're like anti-America, America bad, but because they concentrate industrial development in labor-intensive nations. This is a progressive buildup of productive forces as it deteriorates the global labor divide and therefore should be supported on those grounds.
As it turns out, it is probably not a good idea at this time for America to pull out of Afghanistan. In fact, I would strongly argue the outcome of doing that would be far worse than if we stayed. Despite all the terrible things that happen, because America is meddling there, it would probably be a bad thing if we left, compared to the alternative of us staying. It would be worse.
See, this is why you don't premise leftist causes on morality, especially not consequentialist morality, because every time the most moral outcome will be what is best for the preservation of the present system, because by that outcome's unimposing nature, it will have the least consequences. As wise men would put it, don't be a moral cuck, okay? 5. The irony of reformist anarchism. The greatest motivation for making this video has to be the sheer amount of self-described anarchists who have voiced support for entryism and reformism, when a few years ago I found anarchists annoying for their complete rejection of any notion of a socialist transformation after seizing state power. Anarchism arose in the socialist movement as a tendency in reaction to the concentration of state power in the 19th century. Before anarchism even arrives at socialism and questions of just or unjust hierarchies, it is at its core total opposition to the state and its expansion. It is, after all, an eternal protest against civilization. Dual power and direct action used to be the unique political strategy of anarchism. However, in a sea of TikTok-studied anarchists, I am alone in its support. Well, I mean, not like alone. I guess there's like a few, real, like long-time anarchists out there that, I mean, I'm not an anarchist, but, you get my point. Okay, so this is the end of the video, and I hope all of you enjoyed it, and I hope all the Breadtube people hated it. I began work on this video as early as February, and the goal was to have it done by like late March or early April, but real life got in the way, so don't worry, I didn't die or anything, and I'm not planning on disappearing again. But I'm actually a real person and shit. If I could be like some computer AI or something that just spouts communist propaganda online, I would. But I just don't think that's realistic at the moment. But I can always dream. As always, you can follow me on Twitter and check out all my other links, like the Deviant Art for all the thumbnails and stuff. Twitter handle is at SarmSeller. Sorry, at SarmSeller420. Yeah. There have been people suggest that I make like a Patreon, but for me this is really just a passion, and also with my upload habits, I'd just be consistently letting people down who are giving me money, and I don't want to do that. If you do for some reason, I don't recommend it, but you can send me Reddit coins to my wallet address, which will be in the description. Maybe someday I'll sell merch or something. I think like a pure Tru-Dank shirt would be pretty badass. Anyways, stay tuned and peace out.
I promised you this day secret, and I will not disappoint you. This is the end of our adventure. Nazi Casalet.
The optimist in politics is an inconstant and even dangerous man, because he takes no account of the great difficulties presented by his projects. These projects seem to him to possess a force of their own. Can you not look at me because I'm a character? I'm a character! I have to get in character to make these noises.
I just can't.
Tough time never lasts. Only tough people last.